article is based on a chapter of my dissertation. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland, and the dissertation is looking at museums on the African continent, predominantly in North Africa, West Africa, that were set up by the French during the colonial period, and then following them over the course of decolonization to see how they're transformed or renegotiated or just kind of changing to fit post-colonial cultural politics. So this is, each chapter is kind of an individual case study, and so this is the case study on a museum in Senegal. And I was really interested, I think, when I started the dissertation project in specifically looking at Dakar and looking at Senegal. There's so much really fascinating research about Dakar as kind of an art city, which I mean, I personally had always wanted to go there. I'd always wanted to go to the Dakar Biennale. So I think looking at museums in that context of this very globally renowned city for arts and culture was a really interesting starting point for me. And so I was always, as I was looking at the dissertation, you know, it was going to be a case study on Dakar and then some other places. So that was really the one that kind of came first. And yeah, so the article is sort of looking at this, the Musée d'Art Africain de l'Enfant, which is an art museum of African art in Dakar that started off as a colonial era ethnographic museum. And it was sort of run by this research organization that brought in foreign researchers, predominantly from France, to conduct research missions, anthropological missions, ethnographic missions throughout West Africa. And then a lot of the things that they didn't bring back to France ended up in this museum collection. So I'm looking at basically in 1971, it transforms from this very research-oriented ethnographic collection into a museum of art. And I sort of situate that within a lot of ongoing debates about neocolonialism, the presentation of African art, the involvement of European researchers in collecting this stuff, and how much you should sort of indicate that or talk about that in museum collections. So that's a very broad overview I can go. Yeah, so I think specifically in the context of the JWAH article, one of the reasons I was interested in this journal is because it is more kind of interdisciplinary. There's a lot of authors that I really respect and admire who've published in JWAH and kind of address these thornier questions that don't really sit firmly within the historical discipline. And I think my work also kind of falls into that category. It could be considered anthropology, looking at kind of I do a lot of kind of ethnographic site visits of museums. I work with a lot of art historians who also look at museums, and so I think I'm really hoping, in terms of the impact of this specific article, to talk to first a group of historians who are interested in post-colonial Senegal, and for that population, I'm really hoping to kind of communicate that museums are an important space to analyze, and that a lot of debates about neocolonial intervention, a lot of debates about what the future of post-colonial Senegal will be, were taking place in the context of museums. And so that's kind of the intervention that I'm hoping to make with my fellow historians. And then with others who are interested in museums in Africa who might pick up this edition of the journal or look at this article, I am really hoping to just kind of make an intervention about the importance of this time period. I think right now in just kind of the general museum landscape, there's a lot of conversations about decolonizing the museum. Obviously a lot of conversations in popular culture around cultural repatriation. And a lot of that is, I think, situated in Europe or in kind of the global north. Mm-hmm. And so I think looking at museums and their longer historical legacy in Africa is a really important thing to consider in that conversation. And so I think taking that historical perspective is really important to contemporary conversations about the future of museums as well. When I'm not working, I'm probably out for a run. I run a lot. I just trained and ran my 4th marathon. So so not running as much right now, but I was running a lot in the last couple months. Or I'm out walking my dog. I have a very large Great Pyrenees rescue dog, and she goes for a lot of walks. I really love Stevie Ray Vaughan, so I'd probably go back and see Stevie Ray Vaughan, but that also feels a little bit lame. But my second answer is the Beach Boys, which is also maybe a little bit lame, so. Yeah, so I think in terms of research, right now I'm in the last couple of months of drafting the dissertation, and so that's a lot of work at the moment. And then I think in the future, I mentioned that the dissertation is kind of set up as a series of case studies looking at individual institutions, and I think as I've done more thinking about it, I think that in the future book project, I'd really like to kind of reframe that around more of an intellectual history of different ideas of museology and exhibition and display, and how they're circulating throughout these different institutions. So I already have a lot of ideas of how I'm going to take this dissertation, which isn't even done yet, and kind of transform it in the future into a monograph. So that's the hope for the future research.